Hey, everybody. Welcome to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology, and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. I am your host, Dr. Michael Lennox, coming at you for May 16th in the middle of Eclipse craziness.
It was a total lunar eclipse yesterday.
Yeah, total lunar eclipse. Now, listen, we're going to break the fourth wall here. We are not recording this on Monday when you're hearing this. We recorded this a week ago, right? So actually, in this recording, we haven't quite gotten through it yet, but it promises to be very intense. And if you're connecting with us today in this week's episode, we're going to start with talking about the eclipse and some of the stuff behind why it's so intense. But there's so much going on with Mercury and the retrograde and Sun moving into Gemini and Mercury. And it's going to be quite an episode, kids, because it's a bumpy week. But I want to start by telling a little story following up on what we talked about last week. So you know this well, as Molly does. And some of my clients know this as well, because I've had to cancel a boatload of sessions over the last couple of weeks, like 5-6 weeks, because of this struggle I'm having with my voice. So I took a long rest, about 6 days of rest, and I came back from that rest, and it wasn't effective enough. And so I immediately contacted an ENT that I had scoped out and made appointment for her to look at my vocal cords and to sort of carry me through what I was terrified might be happening. And here to report that I am going to be just fine. That the challenge I'm having with my voice is not on the cords themselves, but in the musculature that houses the larynx. So I'm having a kind of fatigue, overwhelm experience that is ultimately more muscular than the flaps of the vocal cords actually being in compromise. They are not. They're a little too swollen and pink for, being like perfect. But the problem is not the cords, it's the musculature, which means it will heal. I have setting up an appointment with a speech pathologist for some interventional stuff. But here's why I'm sharing this story, kinda. First of all, I found the best ENT ever. She was so holistic in her approach. And when I told her that it was like the 5th day after this screaming that I did a bunch of clients and started to have this, terrible experience of my voice, the first question she asked was, well, what was going on with your clients that day?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay,
so
she is holistic.
That's right. She was already holding up the idea that part of this experience has got to be sort of psychic, which is sort of how I run my whole entire life.
Right.
And so it was sort of fun to be sitting in a medical doctor's office and say to her, look, honey, this new moon where I did the primal screaming, it was directly connected to healing wounds that connect to the very complicated relationship I've had with my mother, where truly one way of describing that complexity is that she grabbed my voice and made it hers. And it was a lifetime of disengagement and healing to find my authentic connection to my voice as not something that my mother was absconding away, with for her own emotional reasons. And that's what was being triggered in that healing process when the new moon in Pisces hit my Chiron. So it was hysterical to be actually like, oh, wow. So part of this is just me reclaiming my voice and moving through a place where a kind of hysterical loss of my voice was showing up as I was moving through these wounds and attempting a deeper healing than ever before. So I'm here to tell you, kids, my voice is fine, but my healing work continues because we never stop.
True.
We never stop having to go in and release things that no longer serve us because they come from traumatic origins. So speaking of release, that is the essence of the energy of these couple of days, that as we come out of this weekend and into the week ahead, we crossing through the threshold of this ginormous full moon in Scorpio that was also a total eclipse. So it hit yesterday on Sunday, so we're fully in the release mechanism energy that every full moon brings. That's deeper because it's Scorpio, the sign that invented death and rebirth, and amplified even more because it's an eclipse. So one of the big possibilities of last week and this week is the potential for radical, sudden, and unexpected endings of things or beginnings of things. So do not be surprised if the week ahead forces you to have to reckon with things you didn't maybe expect to change so suddenly or deeply or profoundly. Uranus is all over these eclipses, and Uranus is that energy of sudden, unexpected pivots, the anything can happen and probably will energy. And if there's anything to sort of hold up as a context piece for how to move through this week and just let it die. If it wants to go away, let it. Try not to argue with any of the radical changes that are coming up, because that's, the time is designed to go to very deep places of release and letting go and letting change happen.
The word that jumps out to me is vulnerability.
Ooh, it's like my watchword this freaking year.
That's my word of the month.
I love
that.
No
joke.
One of the things that reminds me of that is part of this full moon eclipse that we're still very much under the influence of is that Venus, the planet of love and the emotional body, conjuncted with Chiron yesterday, the healer. So we are, in fact, in this death rebirth moment of change at that profound a level is also a healing that requires vulnerability. In fact, one could argue that Venus in Aries is not a good match for vulnerability. Right? Because vulnerability is ultimately an emotional body state where we allow ourselves to be in emotional states without feeling like we have to clamp those feelings down to protect ourselves. Venus in Aries gets a little fired up with these things, with our emotional reactivity and our fight energy, which is sort of the antithesis of vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
And so understand that this week is going to feature experiences that take all of us through healing different woundy places that are still in there, where vulnerability would really be the best approach, as opposed to leading into the reactivities that Venus in Aries might inspire. But the presence of Chiron, the healer, says, is that serving you? Can you soften? Can you allow change to occur without fighting it? And I think that vulnerability is the special sauce of that process that allows us to face change with a little bit more grace and ease. Now, of course, it's Mercury's movement right now that's sort of behind anything that feels confusing, discombobulating, difficult communication, all of the typical Mercury retrograde shenanigans like internet breakdowns and delays and latenesses. I believe that it's more difficult to move through a Mercury retrograde when he's in one of his ruling signs, especially when it's Gemini, because Gemini already has a propensity to have us feel a little too mental or intellectually oriented. Mm-hmm. So that if we're relying on our perceptions and those perceptions get a little challenged because the perception planet is moving backwards, then I think we bump into the furniture more often with Mercury retrograde in Gemini than other signs. One thing that happens, though, as this week starts is that Mercury's finally moving at a somewhat close to his regular pace, right? So when a planet turns around, it doesn't move for a bit. And even though Mercury retrograded last week, it's tomorrow that Mercury moves from 4 degrees of Gemini to 3 degrees of Gemini. It just means that Mercury's moving again. So we're coming a little bit out of what's called the storm cycle of Mercury's turnaround, and a little bit, I'll say it this way. By now, we're used to the challenging posture change of Mercury. As of today, he's moving a little bit faster. It is this week, though, that he's going to make the transit that I think is going to be the most challenging of his triple transits during this retrograde cycle, which is a semi-square to Chiron, the great healer. This hits on Friday. So Mercury transits, you can think of as a sort of 3-day influence, the day of, the day before and after. So this weekend, Friday, with a little bit of Thursday and kind of some influence on Saturday, we're all going to be agitated or frustrated or made aware in a kind of cranky way, some of the wounded stuff that we're working through. It's a subtle geometry, semi-square, so it's not powerful, so it's not going to blow your life up. But it's a transit that guarantees that the whole retrograde cycle has a healing property to it, but not through the sensation of like a yummy healing where we put things together. It's more likely the front end of the healing experience where we become aware of things that are out of alignment and then are forced to reckon with those things that we notice. As we get to the end of the week and you bump into anything that's challenging from the neck up, you want to look back to April 28th. Give or take, again, a day before, day after that date. That was when Mercury and Chiron semi-squared each other the first time. So if you see something by looking back at that late April date, then you can guarantee that the end of the week is going to re-up that issue or put you in the way of taking the healing conversation to another level or a deeper place. Because Mercury's moving backwards, he's more connected to our unconscious than our conscious awareness. So it's possible that something that got hinted at the end of last month will get sort of thrust upon us in a more significant way this weekend, demanding our attention to heal something that might be breaking down. There's a peak of energy also hitting at the beginning of this week. Tomorrow, we'll find Mars in Pisces conjunct Neptune in Pisces. Now, if you remember, if you've been following this on the reg, you'll know that Neptune, Jupiter, and Venus have all been in Pisces of late, and their gathering in that sign has been our access to everything that is lovely, spiritually based, in the direction of expansion and manifesting our heart's desires. I think it might have been 2 podcasts ago. I don't remember which week it was, but I've talked a lot about this. So if you're a regular listener, you should be very familiar with the notion that the great spirit Neptune in his ruling sign of Pisces opens up our spiritual connectivity to top tilt. Since 2011, for another couple of years, we have great access to source just by tapping in as human beings with a spiritual practice. Jupiter swiping by during the last couple of weeks allowed us to add the actual notion of manifesting our desires, like right there in our lives, from that deep Piscean place of anything is possible when we come from that infinite field of creativity that Pisces represents. Venus swiping by brought love in the heart, and she's long gone from there, but she was there. some of what we've been moving through over the last couple of weeks has actually been driven by our very real, greater capacity to give and receive love, because Venus has been taking us through a crash course on that all year long. But now I want to talk about Mars's impact on this whole experience. Venus is long gone, so we have to trust that our level of feeling worthy and deserving, that we worked well enough on that to open ourselves up to more of what we desire based on deserving it and feeling worthy of it. But Mars is the planet that we need activated in order to turn things into form, to take an idea that we feel strongly about in our hearts and make it a project or a business venture or a relationship or something in the world of form. You need Mars.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, Mars is traveling through Pisces, sort of following Venus, right? Remember, they're lovers. Everything they do relates to each other, even if from our perspective, they only maybe connect every 2 years or so. Everything that Mars and Venus are ever doing should be thought of ultimately as how they relate to each other. Because we are both. We are both a Venus-oriented heart that feels and a Mars-oriented body that acts. So what I love about this week is Venus has already passed this way, so our hearts, we have to trust, are more open than they've ever been. And I'm specifically talking about worthiness and deserving. Mars moving through this little stellium is downloading our physical body consciousness with a willingness, perhaps, or an ability to choose from these deeper worthiness places that we've recently excavated and opened up inside of us. So, Jupiter, the planet of manifestation, is just coming out of Pisces and into Aries. So he was in Pisces all of the last 4 months, helping us all create what we want to have and have more of, but as an inside job, right? To feel into what you want. And Jupiter moving into Aries tells us now it's time for action.
Mm-hmm.
And so for the next bunch of months, plans that might have been in the early stages of interior consideration over the first 4 months of the year suddenly get pushed out into the world of now it's time to act, now it's time to move, now you got to do stuff.
And that's starting this week, you're saying? Or just the beginning of that trajectory?
Yeah, thank you for asking, because I know I'm layering a bunch of stuff in. I'm going to say yes, it starts in earnest this week in a way.
Uh-huh.
Last week was the week that Jupiter changed signs, sort of giving us the backdrop of action counts now.
Okay.
Tomorrow, Mars conjuncts Neptune. And so this is a peak moment of Mars, the planet of our choices, behaviors, and actions, kind of taking a bath in the yummy, delicious, watery Piscean ocean of everything is possible. Now, on one hand, there's some of the energy of this particular Tuesday might be a little cloudy or confusing. Mars in Pisces isn't great at knowing what to do next because he's in a mansion of water when he responds to fire.
Mm.
But from a bigger picture perspective about how you want to manifest your desires from here on out, for the rest of the year, it's all about action, taking the steps in a practical way. And there's just something juicy this week of Mars, the planet of action, meeting up with the Great Spirit, like getting a download from the invisible realms of how to embody the actions we might take. And then in a week or so, when Mars moves out of Pisces and into his ruling home sign of Aries, then we're going to be cooking with gas about stepping up, taking action, and initiating those inner desires into outer action steps to get what you desire. So this weekend, we change solar mansions, and the sun will move out of Taurus and into Gemini on Saturday, May 21st. In a general way, when the sun is in the Gemini mansion, we are captivated by our perceptions, our ideas and beliefs, connecting and gathering with others. It's a very social sign, Gemini. It's about making contact and connections with others. So theoretically, communication flows more easily. It's a Mercury-ruled mansion, so it really is all about how we're thinking, how we're perceiving, and what we're up to from the neck up. On the one hand, I'm trying to sort of vibe with the idea that with all of the intensity from the sun in Taurus, with Uranus in Taurus, right? Taurus is typically a grounded and stable mansion, but with the planet that disrupts everything in Taurus and then eclipses in Taurus, that it's possible that the sun moving into Gemini will diminish some of the intensity of the month because we're sort of closing the chapter on the destabilizing energy that Uranus always brings. So it's a loose interpretation of that possibility. I mean, we're still in the craziest month of the year, right? And eclipse season may have ended technically yesterday because of the full moon being the end of it. There are many people who believe, many astrologers who believe that amplified wormhole energy goes all the way to the next new moon. That would be the new moon in Gemini that comes up in June.
So we're keeping on the same track here.
We're keeping on the same track, and Mercury is retrograding in Gemini. And it's just interesting to me because I love anything sort of fascinatingly synchronistic about timing of things. It's always a little fun. When the very day that the sun changes signs and moves into the 0 degree of Gemini is the very day that the retrograding Mercury hits 0 degrees of Gemini and connects with the sun in what's called the inferior conjunction. Absolutely the most important date of every Mercury retrograde cycle. So let's talk about that for a second. When any planet is appearing to move backwards, my language to describe what we mean by that is that the consciousness of that planet is in the unconscious territories, or like I like to call it sometimes, in the below. When it's Mercury, it's very discombobulating to have our perceiving planet, our narrator, like in another room. That's why it's bumpy. That's why we, delays and breakdowns and confusions and misconnects that happen in a Mercury retrograde. One way of archetypally describing why is that the planet that's responsible for keeping us on track, telling us whether to turn right or left or put on a sweater because it got cold out, is gone. He's busy. He's in the unconscious doing some work. The day that Mercury and the sun come together, however, is like an opportunity to shine the light of consciousness itself, the sun, onto what Mercury is doing in the below. So we often get delivered the aha moment or the nugget of what it is each individual is working on. So if anything gets revealed to you this coming weekend about stuff you've been struggling with in negotiations, conversations, relationship adjustments, or these projects we keep talking about, manifesting all your heart's desires, be aware that this weekend could have very important guidance for you about how to move forward in the moments that are coming. But it's unlikely that these messages will be delivered clearly or directly because A, Mercury's moving backwards, and B, he's a trickster archetype. So often the important messages when this conjunction takes place, which, by the way, happens at the exact midpoint of his cycle, like halfway between his backwards start and when he finishes, is this experience on Saturday. And so I want you to be paying attention this weekend for the sideways communication, the things that come up because of happy accidents or in any other sort of unexpected way. And I think this is more likely because Mercury is in Gemini. So you definitely want to be paying attention to everything that's happening in your mind and coming out of your mouth over the weekend, but be extra mindful in terms of appreciating that not every important message is delivered directly, and keep your eyes and ears wide open for interesting and important messages as you move through the weekend ahead. And of course, because the Sun and Mercury are meeting up at the 0 degree of Gemini, they're now going to separate. So that as the Sun moves further into the mansion of Gemini, Mercury is moving back into Taurus. So next week's podcast will go into this in a little bit more depth, but understand that part of what it means to have a Mercury retrograde that starts in an air sign, but retrogrades back into an earth sign is that we are looking to find ways to have our thinking process be more grounded and more connected to love. Come back next week to find more about how that's going to play out. And in the meantime, everybody, have at it.
All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show. This week we have an email-in dream from Mary T. And here's Mary's dream. I was in a room in a building, like a school. There were large windows with lots of light. The room was very cluttered with all sorts of boxes and junk. I could barely move. But there was enough space for me to be with a handful of kids, elementary age, who were my students. I held in my hand a plastic segmented tray, like an ice tray, and in my other hand, I held a container that held beautifully colored pieces of glass-like smooth objects in different shapes. I told the kids that each of them could pick out one of those shapes and place it in a compartment in the tray, and it would grow into a fish. That's when I woke up. Thanks for this interpretation.
Wow. This is an interesting dream about ideas and the nurturing of things. All right. Let's break it down image by image. So if we start with that we're in a school, we know that Mary's having a dream about what she's learning. Right? So it's an instructive dream. It's a dream about life lessons on some level.
Mm-hmm.
I love this image of the large windows with lots of light because it adds a distinction about this space, this learning space, that it has access to seeing a lot, to being aware. Light is symbolic of consciousness or conscious awareness. Windows tell us that we're in a place of separation or integration or like I am me, but I can look out and see fill in the blank, right? I'm in a space that's me and my space. I can look out the windows and connect to other consciousnesses through these windows. So the window implies awareness in this learning space. But this learning space inside of Mary is also where all her chaos is and all of her old ideas and all of the shit from the past that is blocking her from new possibilities because the space is cluttered. She said boxes, junk, and she adds this, I could barely move. One of the things that I like to do in any dream interpretation is what I call the ipso facto. So ipso facto is Latin for therefore, because it is therefore. So how the ipso facto works in this dream is boxes imply that stuff at some point was corralled, collected, and shoved into holding pattern consciousness. Or otherwise, you just throw shit away, right? when something isn't useful, you throw it away.
Right.
But if you put it in a box, there's an intention to hold on to old ideas for whatever reason that people hold on to old ideas.
Mm-hmm.
But the addition of the language, I could barely move, implies that this plethora of boxes and junk are old notions that are interfering with Mary's current viability. Why? Because she could barely move. There's so much old shit. But it's the room of learning, right? So it's not just random stuckness. It's here's where you learn how to do it anew, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so she has just enough space within this cluttered place in her creative psyche to learn the lesson of the moment. There's just enough space for this handful of kids that are elementary school age. This is interesting to me about the elementary school age. So let's assume that this means like 10, 11, 8, 9, 10, 11. Mm-hmm. So that's after abstract thinking, because that rises up at around 7 or 8, but before puberty. So we could be talking about consciousness in Mary from her younger years. We could also be talking about consciousness that's current, but only about 8 years, 9 years, 10 years old. So who knows? Maybe Mary has been on her path for 8, 9, or 10 years, right? And so the age of the elementary school kids might hearken to or be reflecting stuff that got born in Mary's consciousness around 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years ago. I always go for that interpretation first because it usually yields like results where people go, oh my God, yes, 4 years ago I did that, or 8 years ago I did this. So now we get into the imagery that's really, really interesting to me. This ice tray, this compartmentalized ice tray on the one hand, and then these objects that are going to grow. This is important. The objects are going to grow. And so here's where we get meaning in the dream that's about creating new ideas that we want to grow into possibilities. Here's what I just love about this dream is fish as a symbol in a general way are interpretable as interesting ideas that live in our unconscious that have not yet sort of swum up into our awareness as things, but float around in our unconscious as possibilities.
Oh, I did not think about that.
The ocean is our unconscious mind. Fish are animals, so they have sentience. So the symbol of a sentient animal, an idea, but one that lives only in our unconscious, then fish represent that. So if fish are ideas that could eventually turn into form or actions, then these glass objects seem to me to be one step below or before even that, like divine ideas or nuggets that live in existence for everybody. that if you take one of these glass-like smooth objects and you care for it in a certain way, it will grow. And one of the things that's implied in this is that you've got to take this incipient idea and give it its own little compartmentalized home, the little section in the ice tray. She doesn't say it's an ice cube tray. She just uses that image so that we'll see what she's seeing. But if you take this idea that's represented by the glass object and separate it from other ideas, it will grow into what I'm going to call a symbol of an idea that Mary can actually work with and create from.
That's when she woke up.
Well, and so I think she goes into this space to say, oh my God, look how cluttered it is here in my mind. Look at how much old baggage I'm still freaking bumping up against. I can barely move with all of these old ideas. And I'm over, interpreting here, but, bear with me, kids. Then she says to herself, how am I going to find something beautiful and passionate to focus on next? I have no ideas. I have to go to an even earlier place of trusting that I have access to the potential for anything. That's these smooth little objects. If I take one of these potential ideas and I care for it, which I'm also then interpreting means focusing with clarity on something, not distracted by all of the old ideas or old habits or junk from the past, it will grow. Not into form. It's not even there. We're not even in form yet. We're in the before the form. So she's learning something here. I'm going to go, this might be a little obtuse, but I'm standing by it. Fish in the dream would be Mary's ideas to create something, but the smooth glass-like objects that grow into those ideas come from God. And so she's learning how to be with a consciousness that's not that mature yet, only 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years in her journey, that despite chaos, old ideas, and feeling stuck, she can turn to source, trust that ideas and possibilities are infinite. She just has to find some nice ones, separate them out from the chaotic thoughts, and let them grow into something that can lead her to beautiful creativity going forward.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.